This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a slandering jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell in a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will.
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much convenience and have such material motive for putting the position I'm in. Will never let the true facts, some of their boards to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
These people are very high position, Jack.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 125. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, not a moment too soon, as promised, we're coming back at everybody with the 7th installment of our Contra series. I think it's been a few months since we dropped the last one, which was about BCCI.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
This was an interesting episode. I think actually much like BCCI, when we first got the spark of inspiration for doing it, it wasn't even necessarily conceived of as a Contra chapter. But I think after reading just a little bit of the sources we dug through, I realized that it absolutely has to be included in the canon of this subterranean satanic network of, high finance, intelligence operatives, drug dealers, pedophiles, politicians, and other sorts of rogues that in many ways, I think, created the unseen infrastructure of the world that we now live in today.
Yeah, and it picks up quite well from where we left off in certain ways.
Yeah, I went back and listened to Contra VI, BCCI, yesterday, and I was kind of blown away at the, at the overlap and, literally the same people being mentioned in that whole scandal that were involved and the people that are going to pop up today. And for that matter, almost every episode of Contra, there are going to be characters that pop up today in sometimes familiar, but sometimes very new and interesting ways. And also, I think we're trying out something new today in Contra VII because so far, this has been a historical series, mostly focusing on the period from, I'd say, the very late 1970s up through maybe the early 90s, and to some extent up through 9/11. We talked about 9/11 a lot in our last episode.
Yes.
And Operation 9/11, the greatest entrapment scheme of all time. But we haven't necessarily brought the narrative up to today before, I think, in a Contra chapter. Yeah, I think in Mark Lombardi as well. I think we kind of came through 9/11 and the early 2000s, but kind of stopped there. And I feel like I've even said before, I think I said on Twitter years ago, that I feel like with all the Iran-Contra kind of documentation and stuff that was sort of done in the 80s and the 90s with people like Gary Webb, we know quite a bit about this extremely complicated but vast, Iran-Contra enterprise network. But then they seem to almost kind of go underground in the 90s. Some of the older kind of Iran-Contra heads all die off. People like Bill Casey, who mysteriously has a stroke 5 seconds before he was supposed to testify. in 1987, and also people like Gerhard Mertens,
Right.
who we talked about in BCCI, possibly Heinrich or the father of Heinrich,
Yes.
who ran Merrick's AG, the SS Hauptsturmführer, who ran with Otto Skorzeny and other people. He had died off by the late 90s, and George H.W. Bush, the kingpin himself, was kind of retiring, getting older. Of course, he had his son and all his minions in the White House from 2000 to 2008. But still, even if we talk about, George Bush as the puppet master, he's dead now. And I think especially in the Trump era, maybe the trail got kind of lost for people that were trying to trace this Iran-Contra enterprise thing into the present day. Now, I think there have been some hints, and I know we've brought them up before. Big one that's going to be discussed today is the interesting little company called Resorts International, which we'll talk about at length, but this was located on Paradise Island in the Bahamas and was somewhat randomly purchased in 1987 by Donald J. Trump, who then kind of, I think, got in an ownership battle with Merv Griffin, another kind of random person, to go after this very shady company. And it's gone through a variety of ownership changes since then. But that always stuck out to me, that why was Donald Trump buying Resorts International in 1987? And I think we talked about this with Ed Opperman, because he's done a lot of good episodes on resorts. And I know he's had Daniel Hopsicker on, who has done a lot of good research on the kind of criminality rampant in South Florida and kind of international drug trafficking. I think even Daniel Hopsicker broke a bunch of articles about shady things happening in Antigua, which is going to definitely pop up today in some of the books we've read. But all that aside, there's a big elephant in the room, a big boy elephant in the room, you could say, that makes this story we're going to tell today incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we'll just start with what was the MK trigger that kind of sent us off on this investigation and resulted in today's Contra 7. And it's something very contemporary. It might even be outdated by the time most people listen to it, but maybe not. Maybe not.
I think
maybe
it's something we'll be hearing about for a while. Yeah.
It is. And
eventually
of course,
it might blow over, but I think that it's going to be with us for some time. It's already a forced meme, so it's not like it can, get stale. It's been like a stale cracker. It's been shoved down our throats.
And of course, we are talking about this phenomenon that just suddenly flared up less than, I think, a month ago, maybe at the end of June, of a variety of meme accounts popping up on Twitter that are half ironically, but really kind of seriously positing that the best Democratic candidate for president in 2024 is big boy Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
Yes, he's enormous. He's big. He whips ass. Big boy in the big house.
He is. It's a big boy summer.
Yeah, it's
we need
year of the
a
big
boy
boy
president. He's the reincarnation of Chairman Mao. He is the person that democratic socialists really need to take a hard look at and think about supporting. So this kind of started spreading online. There's a main account, Socialist for Pritzker. We don't know who the identity of this individual is, but they seem to be based in the Chicago area, a city that we're going to talk a lot about today. And there's almost like a line that is just almost emerged overnight, fully formed, of kind of, I guess you could say, dirtbag leftist types, a lot of podcasters, people with big Twitter followings, people that, say publish certain trendy leftish kind of magazines and stuff, all kind of getting on the same side of being look, guys, I know it's crazy, but one, isn't he such a big boy? It totally whips ass.
And then,
two,
yeah,
he's such an effective governor.
And of doing this weird, just kind of lie to your face move where they will say those type of things well, I don't know. I mean, he I like the way that he's like assertive in what he believes, and he's had like serious results as a governor. He's got executive experience and like all these stupid like little Democratic strategist things. And then they'll be like, "We're joking." Well, it's not really even funny. Like,
it's not even funny.
Like, I don't like. Why would it be funny? Like, I think that there's many considerations if you're like a Democrat and looking at it from like, how do the Democrats win in 2024? There's many considerations. Like, I think a lot of the idea of incumbency and the power of incumbency, and that if Biden were to choose to run, would it just compromise the party so much, like to have him lose to a challenger or even to defeat a challenger, would it weaken him? That's like the conventional wisdom. I don't know if that's true, but
I feel like we're recording this like near the end of July. I feel like people are rapidly moving away from that idea. Even the most normie kind of political operative type people, I feel like they're laying the groundwork right now to retire Biden.
Yeah,
maybe even
but
before
if he
his term is
retires, that's different. If he were to run, as he's like kind of indicated that he will thus far, I don't have the confidence to say. I'm not saying confidently that if there is a challenge to the incumbent that will weaken the party and they'll lose, or that like it really matters like so much. I'm definitely not saying one way or the other, but I definitely don't think that it's certain that Biden would lose to whoever the Republican challenger is either. It's kind of what was the conventional wisdom in 2020. All these same people were like, "Oh, it's over. Oh, no, like without Bernie, like we're fucked." Like, and that's what they were all saying. I think that we can remember, but
yeah,
they were wrong about that too. They also said like Russia won't invade Ukraine. But anyway, so I think that like sometimes their political instincts.
Sometimes.
Fair assumption until it wasn't. Like, but anyway, like I think that their political instincts sometimes can be wrong, as we saw on Super Tuesday and things like that. So I'm trying to remember where I was going. But like, yeah, this whole idea that like Biden definitely can't win, or that like we need Pritzker or whatever. But I think that as you're saying, like, yeah, I think the groundwork is kind of being laid for something different to happen. A lot of people feel that we need like a fresh face. Like Biden is really fucking old, so that's like a huge problem where he's just like really kind of limping along. Like no one can. Yeah. Like, it would really be crossing an uncrossed horizon in terms of the age of the president. And he just doesn't have the energy. If Jeb Bush was low energy, Joe Biden gives a new meaning to the term. So, yeah, I mean, this kind of was my original point, is that it's not really funny because, like, it is, even though I don't think that it's definitely... their insights are definitely correct, and in fact I think that they could be wrong. I don't think that it's beyond the pale of being like absurd or funny in any way. It's not comical. Socialists.
You mean absurd? You mean absurd or funny in the sense of like it's it's so unlikely to happen?
Well, like when they're saying like, oh, it's a bit, socialist for Pritzker, like, oh, ha ha ha, like we're just joking. Which they say even after, just saying these kind of straight up things about how he would be a good president. But then they kind of hide behind this idea that it's a bit. But that's not only belied by the way they talk about it quite seriously, but also that it's not really funny. Like how comedy to me, it might be, people might disagree, but it comes from like stark contradictions. Like, socialists for Trump. Like I see the humor there. It's not that funny,
you mean like being a socialist supporting a presidential candidate who has inherited $3.5 billion?
Is that where the humor comes from? I guess, yeah.
That's not where the humor, that's the thing. That's not where the humor is coming from. It's like, I think there's maybe even a perverse like undercurrent of a thrill that people get out of it because that is so on its face absurd.
Yeah.
That a bunch of people that have supported Bernie in the last two primaries are now going to pivot to fucking J.B. Pritzker, who, by the way, just recently he started going out and giving speeches, and he's gotten a lot of high marks for, like, after the July 4th shooting, where, he talked about how we need to take everybody's guns, and he's not afraid to say it, and fuck your thoughts and prayers, and really boilerplate, like, liberal culture war bullshit, but he's saying it in a kind of, like, gruff de Beers kind of affect that he's adopted as a big Chicago boy.
Yeah.
And, like he's not even saying things. I noticed like the Socialist for Pritzker account tweeting things like, does J.B. Pritzker support like nationalized healthcare and something else, like very socialistic? And he said like, if it makes you feel better, then the answer is yes. And it's like, I don't get what he doesn't support fucking Medicare for all. Like, I don't get what's funny about this. Like, you're trying to meme. It seems like you're trying too hard to fully say that, like, at least that account is. Maybe other people are kind of fellow traveling because it's just so funny. But I think, I don't know.
I've noticed that multiple times, like when people have been called out on it sort of recently, because I think that, when it started to kind of get rolling, there was a bit of a backlash. Like, what the fuck? Like, why are you pushing JB Pritzker so hard? Then people were kind of like, you're taking this too seriously. But they also seem to take it seriously and to be serious a lot of the time.
They take electoral politics. They take electoral politics and like the Democratic Party way more seriously than like people that are criticizing them for doing Pritzker memeing.
Yes,
do.
And
I
get the idea, like, haha, the joke is
like,
that he's a billionaire. Like, I mean, socialist for Bloomberg, I feel like would be more funny because he's more of like out of touch, like sort of billionaire, like elitist, like freak,
it's
and
not,
there's nothing
You're right.
Whereas
I think as well,
Pritzker, they're like, oh,
yes.
he is, he's maybe a little bit left of center in terms of American politics. So like, I mean, I don't think it's like that much funnier than socialist for Biden would be. Like I feel like I don't think that they're that politically different, honestly.
And here's the thing: I think that there's something particular about socialists for Pritzker or anything like that, in that Pritzker is not just a kind of isolated actor in this entire world of democratic politics and American capitalism in general. He comes from a very powerful family, as we'll get into kind of later in the episode. If you trace the kind of activities and the interlocks between the various Pritzkers, because there's kind of 11 main Pritzkers that split up their fortune in the early 2000s, and they all got basically like several $1 billion each, and they sort of branched off into different fields. Like some of them moved to San Francisco, where they've actually been the second biggest family supporting another governor named Gavin Newsom, who was just like skulking around the White House last week when Biden was out of town, and everyone thinks he's going to run. So I think that it stops being funny when you realize that like there could be kind of like, I don't know, manufacturing the consensual domain for a kind of primary thing when Biden steps down, where you're going to have two Democratic governors, relative fresh faces, and kind of, seemingly different. One's a big boy. The other one looks like Patrick Bateman. And they're going to have their little battle. Meanwhile, one of them is a Pritzker. The other one is basically their whole career has been bankrolled by people in the same exact family. So it's like two Pritzker-backed horses like fighting it out. And then no matter what, this family is going to have an inordinate amount of influence if they can actually get one of their people into the White House. And I think, as we will go through later, the sort of history of the Pritzker family, even by the standards of billionaires, pretty fucking sus, actually. And there's a lot of connections that I think should give any self-proclaimed socialist a little bit of pause before ironically jumping on his bandwagon or saying the new line of attack I think people are using is that he's our generation's FDR. He's going to be a class traitor, you guys. Trust us. But I think if you look at his entire life biography and his behavior and his family's behavior, the idea that he would be an FDR, there's a lot of criticisms you could make of that, but the idea that he would even be an FDR, I think, is pretty laughable on its face. But maybe
I don't.
Should I?
Yeah. All right. Well, sorry, we're going to say yeah.
Well, I did want to read one example
right.
in case people are still confused of like what we're talking about, because it will contrast very boldly with the information we're about to jump into. But this is just one example of the kind of a, sentiment laundering that I think is going on. This is an article from July 6th in Current Affairs magazine by, I think it's editor-in-chief and chief auteur, Nathan J. Robinson, who I've always found to be a little bit of a curious character, like dressing up like a Tom Wolfe dandy, like living in New Orleans, like, I don't know, like big family still profits off of invested like wealth from slavery vibes. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
I don't have any like a special fondness for Nathan Robinson. I mean, I don't have too much animus towards him, really. I never liked him or his magazine, really. He always just seemed like kind of like, I don't find what you're about to discuss from him surprising is maybe the best way to put it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Current Affairs is like much like Jacobin. It's like one of these kind of trendy democratic socialist, little dirtbag friendly kind of publications. I think they publish a lot of people like kind of from that world. But he's very much about having a kind of like serious political analysis of this situation. Anyways, I'm just going to read a little bit of like his logic, because this is what I see bubbling to the surface right now. He starts by saying that Joe Biden's presidency is in very serious trouble. A new poll found that 71% of Americans do not want Biden to run for re-election, and, Democrats are going to get punished in the midterms. He says none of this should come as a surprise to anyone familiar with Biden's record. Surely when leading Democrats helped to crush Bernie Sanders and ensure Biden's nomination, they knew Biden had spent decades showing he didn't care about abortion rights. Jacobin warned, for instance, that even if Biden was able to get elected, his presidency would probably be an unpopular failure that could pave the way for a far-right successor in 2024. The problem, of course, is that Democrats cannot turn back the clock and nominate Bernie Sanders in 2020. They are looking at 2024, and they realize the obvious. Biden, with his approval rating having collapsed and showing no signs of recovering, does not seem likely to be reelected. But if not Biden, who could the party run? Biden himself seems to want to run again and is reportedly annoyed at those who are disappointed in him or think he should retire. Vanity Fair reports that behind-the-scenes Democratic conversation is full of such questions as, if Biden doesn't run, what then? And there's a backup plan, right? Of course there isn't a backup plan. Of course? Okay. Joe Biden was only nominated because, even though his campaign had been failing, centrist Democrats agreed he was the best shot the party had at keeping Bernie Sanders from being nominated. There was no plan then, and there isn't one now. No conspiracies ever. There are no obviously strong alternative candidates. Pete Buttigieg is an empty suit. Kamala Harris has disastrous political instincts. Every Democrat who immediately comes to mind as a 2024 contender seems like a surefire loser. This is a problem because the GOP are energized and increasingly support a terrifying, radical, theocratic, hyper-capitalist agenda. Even those of us who detest the Democratic leadership have to acknowledge that a Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis presidency needs to be avoided, if at all possible. When J.B. Pritzker first ran for the governorship of Illinois in 2018, I was annoyed. Pritzker is a billionaire heir, and I am disinclined to believe that there are, quote, good billionaires. The possession of extreme wealth is itself immoral. Yes,
I'm disinclined to believe that, but here's why he's a good billionaire.
But when, a couple of years into Pritzker's term, I spoke to lefty friends in Illinois and expected them to rant about what a ridiculous sign of democratic corruption it was to have a billionaire as their governor, I was surprised to find that they had nothing negative to say about Pritzker. In fact, they said he was, and he puts this in italics, a shockingly good governor. They were impressed with him because he had signed into law some major progressive policies that a neoliberal centrist governor would have fought tooth and nail. Indeed, Pritzker has been signing bill after bill, and many of them are exactly what progressives want. In his time in office, Pritzker has approved legislation that has, and he gives like a long hyperlinked fucking DC consultant list of like everything, like introduced $15 minimum wage, effectively ended immigration detention in the state.
Okay, great. Something literally every Democratic governor would do. $15 minimum, which isn't sufficient at all. It's like the bare minimum. Like, oh, wow. What else? What else is on the list?
Yeah, okay. He put the state on a path to 100% clean energy by 2050 through a kind of mini state-level Green New Deal.
Wow. Oh, great.
Wow,
yeah.
okay.
Literally, Charlie Baker, the Republican governor of Massachusetts, is probably like... Yeah, anyway, whatever.
Well, yeah, though I don't think there's anything on this list that a mainstream like modern day like Nancy
I don't
Pelosi
understand
Democrat,
like how he's like
support.
distinct from like Joe Biden. Honestly, like that's the thing. Like
he's not. Well, he talks tough,
and he's a
like,
big
with
boy,
an
and he whips ass,
he's a big boy.
and like which is like okay, great. Like he's. I'm not trying to fat shame, but I don't like I don't see how that's a benefit. I guess
like reverse psychology
like, he has,
fat shaming that makes him cool.
Where like he can
looks like
throw his weight around
character.
because he's got. Yeah.
Honestly, I think he looks like a fucking Sopranos character, and they love it.
Okay.
Anyways,
great.
okay,
Word.
so yeah, and then a bunch of like symbolic reforms that are okay. He guaranteed the right to abortion, like literally any Democrat would. He banned the burning of certain toxic chemicals. I guess not bad. How about this? Check this out. Introduced a suite of criminal punishment reforms. abolishing cash bail beginning in January 2023. Remember, we just talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. And also, Chicago was a huge testing ground.
The like weird algorithm where it's like,
I
do
think
you have a
it's
good relationship with your father? Like, if so, like you get bail. If not, like no bail. Period.
Yeah. Basically, I suspect. I didn't look exactly into it, but I suspect from everything I know, this is the Safe-T Act, Safe-T Act. It probably, I would be willing to bet, because every other attempt to abolish cash bail by like these types of progressives around the country has used some kind of sus like AI tech algorithm to like calculate your flight score or something and then decide whether or not to let you out. I have a feeling that that's what's going on here. So JB Pritzker's like all down with these Silicon Valley weirdos, to like reform policing and put like a kind of woke gloss over it. But let's see. Oh, he required health insurance plans to cover glucose monitors. Like, again, like good, but like what this guy's Chairman Mao. Okay. He increased funding for nursing home staffing by $700 million. He created paid COVID sick leave for school employees. He banned unlicensed privately manufactured ghost guns, increased school budgets. Okay. Like, so he's a Democrat.
Yeah.
Right.
So
with like a supermajority in his state. Okay,
thank you, Deval Patrick. Socialist for Deval Patrick. That's the thing.
I feel like I'm reading a little bit like I'm reading the blog post of somebody that's trapped in an abusive relationship with like a BPD gaslighter who's like got them to like rationalize like literally supporting a billionaire after supporting Bernie Sanders and being like, no, but it's actually really like logical.
I've been thinking lately about how, well, the thing is like Nathan Robinson didn't start this. And like, it's really amazing to me how people like just fall over and like that they don't have like a resistance to like being psyoped basically, and like, or in a like a less charged term perhaps, being memed into shit. People just like believe,
manipulate it.
Yeah, manipulate. Like they can just very easily like just cave in and go along with shit. Like if it's just aggressively promoted, or if there's like a forced meme around it. I think that's true. We've been seeing that this week on Twitter with the whole thing of like, who's a proletarian? Like now we all hate the Starbucks union or something. Like it's weird how people
that's
like
a can of worms.
It's weird how people will like go along with that because it's like promoted so aggressively. I think it's a very strange phenomenon where people it's odd how like people's minds can just conform themselves to whatever thing is presented to them like aggressively enough.
You think that it would be less effective as like a bit, but it's actually more effective as a bit.
Well,
because it's more medically viral as a bit.
Just as like a side note to this, I happened to, while you were talking about this, I just go on Twitter and search Pritzker and the phrase "a bit." And I found this interesting thread here between several prominent blue checks and the general sort of left sphere, where I think it's an instructive kind of conversation. So it starts off with a tweet by Jeff Stein, who's a White House economics reporter for The Washington Post. And he says, to what extent is socialist for Pritzker, quote unquote, a bit? And Adam H. Johnson, who, I think he has a prominent podcast, I think
citations.
Yeah,
needed.
does he do that with Nima Shirazi? I always like Nima Shirazi, but whatever. In this case, it's like whatever.
He's kind of in this media milieu in New York.
Yeah, he replies, "The people are calling for it," and he quote tweets himself in a reply to at By Your Logic, saying, "Putting all my chips on JB Dark Horse 2024 run," and then he replies to himself, I think, saying, "This interestingly, this is not an endorsement because I'm also not sure if I'm being ironic." That, I think, is a very telling statement. Not to, like, single out this person. I don't really know his work or anything. I always did like Nima Shirazi's old blog, Why to Sleep in America. But, that was a while ago.
I think there's a whole thing. I don't want to pop off. We're going to do a lot of popping off today.
Okay, but
we're be
I'm just saying this is a telling statement to me.
No,
I'm not sure if I'm being ironic. Like, not to, like, for all intents and purposes, that's an endorsement. Like, whether you say it's not an endorsement.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah. And I think this is actually a perfect
sort of
time to read.
Stance, anyway.
Yes. Well, I think to that point, I would like to read the tweet that the screenshotted tweet that is currently pinned on my Twitter profile and very consciously been pinned there for like since the beginning of the month. I think this is one of the realest tweets that have ever been fucking tweeted on that website by Crypto Cuttlefish in March 2017, who said, "I've said before that I think the whole 'I'm CIA LOL' rejoinder is the nervous laugh of somebody who doesn't know who they really work for." And I think the PSYOP aspect even ties in, like the irony aspect of they're almost lost in like an ironic wilderness of mirrors to the point where they don't even know if they're being serious or not. And I think when you don't know if you've lost the ability to like be on Twitter and like not realize if you're operating ironically or earnestly, then I feel like you're...
Especially like, in your support for J.B. Pritzker to be president. Like, I get, like, I'm not going to, like, be like, oh, you know, if it were, like, J.B. Pritzker versus DeSantis or something, like, I'm not going to begrudge you supporting J.B. Pritzker for various reasons. I mean, I do think the Democrats, like, just fundamentally suck and are, like, aren't capable of doing anything good, like, as we're seeing bear out in the current administration, where, like, it's not like, you know, now that we have Biden, like all, you know, like all these horrible things like are not happening or whatever. It just seems like the like marching on somehow almost as if like we are under like, you know, these like, it's a fascist like Republican administration. Like, but, you know, but I also kind of do think that it's at least equally possible that like say, you know, this all works, goes off without a hitch and like J.B. Pritzker does challenge Biden in the primary and like even if he does beat him, I think it's equally likely that he doesn't beat him and then Biden is like even more weak looking, then just gets owned. Or like I think it's totally likely that then he just loses because I think it's possible that conventional wisdom would bear itself out. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not committing to saying that it would, but I think they could just be walking into a total trap. Like,
well, they could be, but also I also want to entertain the possibility of, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that big boy motherfucker could win in 2024 with the right amount of he could win. Media manipulation. Now, for sure. You know, and again, we'll get back to like the actual like the receipts on J.B. Pritzker and like why he should never be trusted. But I feel like, let's say he does get into the primary, are you going to have these kind of relatively influential kind of media accounts and personalities telling everybody that voted for Bernie in 2016 and 2020 and like is in the DSA that they should get behind Pritzker as opposed to other candidates? Like, is that really where we're going with this? Because it could. Like, I could see that literally happening. It would be absolutely absurd from my point of view. You know, and who knows, like, what the ultimate, like you said, like, it could be a trap. It could just be a way to, like, the fucking scramble the Democratic coalition more. Like, I don't even know at this point.
I kind of, you know, again, like, I am not, like, someone who's going to, like, unlike some people out there, I'm not going to be someone who's, like, presenting themselves as, like, a political analyst who's, like, going to game the election. Like, you know, even though I think, you know, maybe just by virtue of not, like, making these bold, like, asinine predictions that then blow up in my face, you know, I think I've been more right about some of these things than others. But it seems like Pritzker, you know, he's the governor of Illinois. I feel like the conservatives could really, like, you know, or the Republicans could really, like, hit him with that, like, pretty hard. You know, I feel like Chicago has been, like, a big talking point for them. Like, yeah, it's a war zone. It's a hellhole.
Well,
like,
especially, you know, being, like, that shows the out of touchness, too, that, like, he's all about, like, Mr., like, I'm going to go out there, like, after the shooting and, like, say I'm going to ban guns and, like, literally, like, the city you live in, like, the biggest city in your state, does have like, a pretty horrible gun violence problem.
It's one giant gun-free zone. No, and look at it. You know, like, it's like, I don't know. I don't think that he's, like, over the ironclad candidate. And I don't, like, even though, like, I mean, it's incredibly infuriating to see people say that, like, there was that, like, article that called him, I think it was in WAPO, that called him like a working class billionaire. I think it even quoted one of these people who like just push him aggressively on Twitter, like, which is the exact same thing they said about Trump.
Socialist for Pritzker guy.
Yeah, but I don't think that will like go over with like the general electorate. Like, I don't think that the people who you're going to try to be getting into a coalition for Pritzker are going to be as susceptible to that line as like the people who were going to go into a coalition for Trump. You know, like, I think that there's probably some people who will equally work on, but, you know, generally, I think, come on, like, it's stupid on its face. Like,
I have to say I noticed that the people that it seems to be working on the hardest is not the general, like, proverbial hard hat, like, working Democrat kind of person, like, in the Rust Belt, but it's, like, hipster-type media, academia, like, podcast-adjacent people in, like, New York and L.A.
Yeah.
And, like, DSA people. In fact, let me just read this paragraph from Nathan J., because he tells on them a little bit inadvertently. He said, after listing all these amazing, just like centrist Democrat achievements, he says, Pritzker is a pragmatist, not a radical. He might have ended cash bail and increased state spending, but he has also improved the state's finances overall and signed a measure cracking down on rings of criminals that organize retail theft. Oh, great. Still, when you talk to a leftist in Illinois, they are likely to tell you that Pritzker is about the best Democratic governor one could reasonably hope for. Democratic Socialist Chicago Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa told the Washington Post that, quote, there's a strong argument to be made that J.B. Pritzker is the best Illinois governor since progressive John Peter Altgeld. Like, okay, DSA, stay winning. Partly the high marks are because the bar is so low. As one Twitter commenter said, in our lifetimes, Democratic governors have been more likely to resign in shame, lose to Republicans, or help conservative Democrats join Republicans to stop good things, cough, Cuomo, than to do anything good for regular people. Until Pritzker. Shut the fuck up. Indeed, in Illinois, the bar is particularly low, since 4 of the state's past 10 governors have gone to jail. I am also skeptical of Pritzker for his decision to pursue the incredibly risky political strategy of trying to get the GOP to nominate radical far-right candidates on the theory that they are more easily beaten. This strikes me as dangerous and unprincipled. By the way, J.B. Pritzker is doing that. He's dumping tens of millions of dollars into, like, promoting the most fucking batshit
Which
QAnon,
worked out
like,
so
MAGA
well for
candidates
Hillary
possible.
Clinton when they promoted the original MAGA candidate. It worked out amazingly. It's a tried and true strategy. I don't see why anyone would not.
Why would it backfire? Yeah. So if you're mad about people, getting elected to Congress who deny, like, the January 6th insurrection and love Trump, maybe thank the guy who literally bankrolled their campaign. But, he did it ironically and tactically, right?
Right, because they're easier to defeat.
Yeah, so, very radical, very different from normal Democratic thinking, as we can see. But, Nathan J. says, but the measures Pritzker has signed into law are real steps forward. They matter to people. They are not bullshit, and they will actually alter many lives in positive ways. If the Democrats are going to stand a chance of retaining national office, they need to be able to show that they can actually deliver benefits that people will see and feel. Instead, what we usually get is party leaders telling us how bad the Republicans are, and when anyone asks for more than not being the Republicans, Democratic leaders ask us if we are saying we want the Republicans to win. It is absolutely maddening, and is part of why young people are increasingly disenchanted with the party, although they have few other obvious options, a fact that the party takes advantage of. They also work hard to keep it that way by keeping third parties off the ballot. Okay, literally like standard Democracy Now! Talking points. Pritzker may have signaled his openness to running in 2024. He said it's certainly possible. Now, this is funny. This is hilarious, as we'll see. If Pritzker runs, he needs to run the Bernie playbook, not the tired Biden strategy of promising to work with Republicans on sensible bipartisan compromises. It is not actually clear how progressive Pritzker is personally, or whether he is pushed to the left by the movement organizations in his state. There are some promising signs. He has, for instance, made concrete demands of the Biden administration on abortion that give us some indication of what a President Pritzker might do differently. But the only reason to get behind a Pritzker presidential candidacy would be if he was likely to give the right a real fight and seriously distinguish himself from the status quo. Already, there is a niche contingent of online lefties who are, perhaps slightly ironically, very into J.B. Pritzker. A Socialist for Pritzker Twitter account has attracted thousands of followers and makes it clear that while it is partly joking, it is also serious. The account's anonymous creator said, quote, people like JB because he was a Democrat who ran on things that were very popular amongst Democrats, and then he basically did all of those things in office. Somehow, that is rare. He delivers for the base in a way we expect from red state govs. When Jeff Stein for the Washington Post asked Twitter users about the Socialist for Pritzker idea, many claiming to be from Illinois responded with sincere positivity about their governor, or suggested that the hefty Pritzker and 6'9" Pennsylvania state candidate John Fetterman would make for a dream team of Democratic, quote, big boys. The fantasy seems to be that Pritzker could serve as an FDR for our time, a wealthy class trader who has the wisdom to understand that if people like him aren't going to be eaten alive by the populist hordes, they need to get with the program and let the labor movement lead them. And then he posts a photoshopped image of like a Chinese Cultural Revolution like propaganda with J.B. Pritzker's face superimposed on Mao, like over like a shining sun, and like people holding up little red books. That may be just a fantasy. I think it's a role Pritzker might conceivably serve. If he was principled and intelligent, well, we'll get to that.
You honestly could have written this article about Mitt Romney, like before he tried to go to the right to appeal to the rest of the country. Like literally. Like I think that like pre-2012 Mitt Romney, you probably could have written this article about.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Or kind of anybody, like it's so bending over backwards trying to make it sound like J.B. Pritzker is like something
It's
different.
almost, you could, like, you really could say almost about anybody. Like, the fantasy is that, like, I don't know, like, any given billionaire would be our new FDR. Like, my fantasy is that, like, Gandalf, like, comes out of the clouds. Like, what the fuck? Like, shut up.
Does J.B. Pritzker support destroying the One Ring and the fires of Mount Doom? If it makes you feel better to feel that way, then yes. Yeah. Like, okay, like, okay, he closes here. That may be just a fantasy. I think it's a role Pritzker might conceivably serve if he was principled and intelligent, but it would also require Pritzker to be willing to distance himself, from the Democratic establishment. Anyone running with a D next to their name in 2024 is going to need to separate themselves from Biden's legacy, because Biden has none, which means taking a stance as someone independent from the hugely unpopular National Party leadership. The Democratic label itself is going to be an albatross in 2024 because Biden has helped reinforce every perception of the party as weak, hypocritical, and full of hot air and false promises. But we still desperately need some way to keep Donald Trump out of office. Okay.
They all think that it's going to be Trump for sure.
They do.
I'm not. I'm also not 100% sure of. He's given indications that he'll come back in. Again, I'm not 100% sure of that either. But I don't know either. But anyway. Yeah.
But anyways, he says, the Democratic label is going to be an albatross because, Brandon sucks. But we still desperately need some way to keep Donald Trump out of office. And so it's high time to realistically consider options. Some leftists are hoping Bernie Sanders will run again. I'd be inclined to support him if he did, because Bernie is still in great form and articulates left arguments more compellingly than any other national political figure. But we have to admit that a third Bernie run is not optimal, since it's hard to imagine him serving out a full term in peak shape. I am reluctant to endorse the idea of finding a, quote, billionaire of our own to challenge the plutocrats of the right, but an FDR-style presidency is the bare minimum it will take to keep this country from lapsing into Christian fascism, and if we are not to have a proletarian revolution anytime soon, and let us hope that we do, we at least need a Democrat who does more than absolutely nothing. I look over the country, and the only one I see who conceivably reaches that threshold is J.B. Pritzker.
I can conceive of a million people reaching that. Like, I don't see why. Like, Gavin Newsom is probably the most obvious parallel, and you definitely write this article about Gavin Newsom if you wanted to.
You absolutely could just plug in Gavin Newsom. Like, he does what Californians want. He's
and also the whole idea that he's going to distance himself from the Democratic establishment that he funds. That
I brought this up before. I just saw this last night digging through some stuff that J.B. Pritzker, I think, of all the money of the, I don't know, $150 million or something that the Democratic Governors Association received last year in donations, about half of it was just from J.B. Pritzker. So when you talk about he's going to have to distance himself, why not just come out with it and say he needs to buy the Democratic establishment because he's already halfway there? Not to mention the right-wing MAGA people. He's subsidizing them, but he's also bankrolling the mainstream Democratic establishment. Yeah. And, as we'll spin off into later in the episode, the idea that somehow he's just a detached governor who happens to be a billionaire and has no interlocking connections with the Democratic establishment. It's such a ridiculous, it's so illogical. It doesn't even take that much research to flesh it out how this guy is a major backer of various politicians Gavin Newsom and stuff. And those people are completely in line with the Nancy Pelosi kind of leadership and stuff that I mean, maybe he'll go and pretend to do that. I feel like that's the subtext here, is like what J.B. Pritzker really needs to do is come up with a kind of tweak his persona and kind of vaguely gesture at being like a democratic socialist, like FDR class trader. But not then he won't actually have to change like much of his policies because, as Nathan says, they're already policies that the left wants and loves. You know, I could think of like a much longer list of left policies that I actually would want that, you know, go a lot farther, like go a lot harder, etc. At this point, I don't even see the Democratic Party as like a vehicle for implementing left policies I would want.
See, like if J.B. Pritzker had instituted like, I don't know, like a $22 minimum wage or something, then I'd be like, wow, he went above and beyond. Like, but it's like,
right, but 15.
Yeah, like everyone has done that. Like, and it's all like, you know,
he's probably just trying to stay competitive.
It's not even immediate. It's like $1 a year. Like, you know, the same thing of like, oh, in 2050 we'll have clean energy or something. Like
that too. I mean, he's all co-signing the Green New Deal thing, which is completely funded by like fucking billionaires and like Davos people. And like, I'm increasingly like highly just suspicious of like the entire way it's like framed in our political discourse, like to a point where they do seem to be open to kind of like crushing like sectors of the economy and like having like $8 gas and stuff so that like Pete Buttigieg can drive around in his Tesla. And it's just all like such hypocritical, dumb, like I don't know. Anyways, but you know what?
Yeah.
Today we got a whole hour. We've laid out.
Oh, I knew. Yeah, but
the frame of this.
Yes.
But okay, you know, final thoughts before we jump into our subjective research today. Final thoughts.
No, I was definitely concerned. I was like, we need to not just talk shit about J.B. Pritzker like this entire time. We actually need to like deal with the subject of the episode expediently,
which is going to involve them.
Yes, they
in short time
definitely will be. All like the Pritzkers will be implicated. Yeah, I don't know. It's very weird, but it just show how the Overton window just has like really shifted out from underneath our feet, like in real time. Like the fact that there's like any comparison between like J.B. Pritzker and like Bernie Sanders. Like Bernie Sanders, like, you know, say what you will about him. Like, I'm not like super all about like Bernie, like to save like the country or whatever. But I don't think there's a comparison. I mean, I think that like really, you know,
not even close.
Yeah,
not even
like
close.
Actually, and, like an outsider, actually someone who was like meaningfully different, actually someone who took like stands throughout his career that were, you know, admirable,
deeply unpopular. Yeah. And like, and you know, did some kind of like sus shit too along the way, but I think still is a more complicated figure. And at the end of the day, even on a symbolic kind of political marketing level, if there's one like thing that you could associate with like Bernie Sanders, something that he rails against constantly and every time he talks, like, the billionaires, us, not the billionaires. So how the fuck is everybody that like canvassed for Bernie and was pushing it super hard in 2020 going to literally switch to a billionaire that isn't even pretending to adopt like Bernie's platform yet? I mean, maybe they think they can push him, but that almost makes me wonder, like, is this some kind of weird game going on where they're almost like falling into a manipulative trap of like thinking they're wagging the dog, but actually they're the ones getting wagged kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, either way, maybe, like whatever the case, even if it is all just like for fun or something, or like them getting caught up in like this sort of like, I don't know, like J.B. Pritzker's amazing charisma and like resemblance to like a Sopranos character or whatever the explanation for it might be, like it's still like, it's really amazing how I think largely for a lot of people, it just comes down to the fact that it was just like very aggressively pushed in certain quarters.
That's also that also does make me wonder, this account, J.B. Pritzker, you know, Socialist for Pritzker, started like, I don't know, a little over a month ago. And I think, as we've seen before in certain sectors of like, you know, social media and stuff, this guy takes off like wildfire immediately, gets kind of co-signed by all the right irony accounts. And after like a month, he's got like 12,000 followers. He's getting quoted in Current Affairs, in Washington Post, in Gawker, a bunch of other publications. And now it's almost to the point where I think I even read an article, one of the mainstream articles just about J.B. Pritzker's like laying the groundwork, that like his team has even been exploring more unconventional ways to raise J.B. Pritzker's profile, including the use of memes. Now, they didn't say we sprinkled a bunch of cash on some like Twitter poster little political types to go out there. We're not saying we bought followers for this account or that this is all part of a plot from a billionaire who could spend money that like is like a pocket lint to him to basically fund influence operations on something like Twitter. I think it's something that we just have to keep in the back of our head when we think about all this stuff.
There is a precedent for it because, you know, the other billionaire who ran for president in recent memory, Bloomberg, did the exact same thing, right? He like paid a bunch of Instagram
he hired
influencers.
Fuck Jerry.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I feel like this is almost a more refined
he fucked
strategy.
it up. So the people that he hired, who would probably be the exact same people, would have like learned from their past mistake, which like blew up in their face and be like, let's do this properly after doing like a little bit of market research. And
Of course. Like, or it does seem, and I don't know who's working for the various Pritzker foundations or for working for Pritzker the politician. Maybe he has some DSA people working for him, but it does seem like kind of this orbit of J.B. Pritzker seems to be hyper aware of like dirtbag leftism, like its memes and its posture and its language and kind of its attitude and stuff like that. Like it almost feels like it was very intelligently designed to like totally tap into that nerve of like irony, dirtbag left stuff. And it's getting, that's really the nexus point of like where these ideas are spreading. And I think, as I probably said recently on, I forget on Twitter in the Grotto, I said it, but you know, somebody asked like, why would any of these podcasts ever be like an op? Because like they're all so marginal at the end of the day, even if they made millions of dollars, they're all so marginal. Yeah. Like, why would the CIA waste its time like influencing movies or TV or literary magazines or literally any other thing that they've like infiltrated throughout the Cold War up to today? Yes. But the thing I always tell people is like, these people, you're right, like most Americans have no idea who say like these Twitter shit posters or podcasters are, but these people are much more well known among a slightly larger group of people that I would say are typically like college educated on the upper end of the class spectrum. They live in big cities, they work in media, they work in politics, or you know, something like that. And those people do have a wider influence, like in a trickle-down way, on kind of bigger things that get memed kind of in the more mainstream. So it's like when you see like somebody like Dave Weigel writing this long article about just pondering like this interesting socialist for Pritzker phenomenon. And it's like, that's a perfect example of like, this guy is clearly heavily kind of influenced and kind of rolls with ideologically and attitudinally with maybe these like relatively niche like Patreon podcast type people that are on Twitter all the time. But then he goes and writes a WAPO article about it. So you can't really say that, oh, what they're doing is just a bit that doesn't matter and it has no impact on wider society. I think there absolutely is a trickle-down effect that, you know, if you're influencing the mainstream influencers, then you have kind of an amplified impact. And I think what you're seeing now is like places like WAPO kind of laundering those ideas more into a mainstream kind of language that like wonky politicos in the Beltway can like fucking understand and get down with, which is like, look, J.B. Pritzker, he's a pragmatic guy, but like, look at all these dirtbag Bernie people that love him. It's almost like even though he's a billionaire, they love him. That just goes to show how amazing he is, that they don't hate him for being a billionaire. But I think, you know, it's time, I think, to get into the main course here. But keep all of this closely in mind as we move through it, because we're about to enter the web of webs, the interlock of interlocks. Particularly one little node, this is where we started, which is something that, you know, Crypto Cuttlefish posted a lot about a few years ago. So it's always been in the back of my mind. But this little institution called the Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas. This is something that pops up in a number of Mark Lombardi's interlock drawings, and especially like all the people associated with it. And we're going to dive into that, but just know off the bat that like one of the many salient connections here is that the largest account depositor at this place, the Castle Bank and Trust, throughout the 1970s was the Pritzker family. The Pritzker Family Trust were the largest, you know, depositors into this bank, which we're about to find out is, you know, up there with like BCCI, Nugan Hand Bank, First American, Riggs Bank, go down the list. it is on the roster of like extremely sus fucking Cold War banks that spiral off in a million directions. So I don't know. Should we properly get into it? Yep. All right, let's do it.
Well, you wake up in the morning, you hear the work bell ring, and I march you to the table. You see the same old thing. Ain't no food upon the table. Ain't no pork up in the pan. But you better not complain, boy. You get in trouble with the man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. All right. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a ever-loving light on me. Yonder come Miss Rose. How in the world did you know? By the way she wears her apron and the clothes she wore, Lord. Umbrella on her shoulder, piece of paper in her hand. She come to see the governor. She want to free her man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a ever-loving light on me. If you're ever in Houston, oh, you better do right. You better not gamble, and you better not fight. Oh, chef, you grab you, and the boys will bring you down. The next thing you know, boy, oh, you're prison bound. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. All right, bro. Let the midnight special shine a ever-loving light on me.
Today, I'd say the core of our explorations today, of our research, were two books that were written by, I would say, a pretty cool author. I would put him on a kind of a Gustavus Myers, Gary Webb kind of shelf for research hounds of SJ,
Yeah.
that SJ stands. And this guy is Alan A. Block, who was an academic. I think he was a criminologist. That was his main field of focus. But he wrote two books that really, honestly, right off the bat, I think that a lot of Mark Lombardi's interlock drawings, a lot of them must have been based directly from the information in these two books, because he kind of hits on everybody, like all the big hitters. But they are, the first one is Masters of Paradise, which I think came out in the early 90s. And I have to say off the bat, probably might be the hardest book to find that we've ever done on the podcast. Like, you actually didn't get to read it because I had sent you like a DOI link, and it turns out you didn't have access to it.
Yeah.
this is the only book I've ever seen where the cheapest ebook that you can buy of it is $17, and if you try to buy it in like the Apple bookstore, it's like $52.
You have to dig for the $17 one, which I did end up buying.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah.
And I found, I guess if you go on a kind of strange website called perlego.com, which is sort of like Scribd, and you sign up for a free trial, they also have a copy of it. So that's where I was able to read
you didn't
it.
shell out the $17. I thought that you did because you were complaining about like the searchability of that. Yeah, all right, well.
But I just ended up signing up for the fucking free trial, like going for it.
Yeah, I never sign up for those things. Like that's where my like PDF hunting ends. I'd rather just pay the cash. But all right, well, I can do Control F in this thing or whatever.
Okay, cool. I wrote a lot of notes. Probably there's so many fucking notes on this book, and then. The second book is, I think, from 2004, and it is called All is Clouded by Desire, Global Banking, Money Laundering, and International Organized Crime. And both of these books are like absolute bangers of like research information. You know, Masters of Paradise focuses on a little island that has come up a lot on SJ, both in the Contra series, but also outside of it many times. And that is, of course, Paradise Island in the Bahamas, where Resorts International was built in the 60s. And, you know, we've talked a lot about it before. I think I won't even kind of recap it because the book does such a thorough job of laying out what happened. Then also, the primary focus of Masters of Paradise is the Castle Bank and Trust, which was set up by two very interesting individuals who we're going to explore pretty deeply. Paul Hellowell, who was an OSS veteran in the Far East Division in World War II. I think he was actually appointed head of the Far Eastern branch of the OSS during World War II, and then became a businessman in South Florida and a basically very murky but well-established CIA operative throughout like the 50s and 60s and the 70s, I think, when he died. And then there was his partner, a very interesting man named Bert Cantor. And Bert Cantor was a very powerful and prominent Chicago tax attorney. And these two guys got together in the 1960s to found the Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas. And the activities that bank would get into, the scandals that would erupt from it, the scandals that were covered up from it, are very, very fascinating. And they end up tying into kind of the entire broader Contra network, but even the network that existed before the Iran-Contra enterprise, because I think we can almost like confidently say at this point that the sort of Oliver North Iran-Contra thing that, you know, started in 81, in some respects, like new things were kind of developed and added to it, but it also, I feel like, was leaning on structures and networks that already were in place by the time that, you know, Reagan got into office. And particularly Bill Casey, who we know is just such a busy man flying around the world doing all kinds of things, that he was able to take some networks almost off the shelf and plug them in and like create an even vaster network. But there was definitely like various networks there, and a lot of it has to do with the intersection of kind of like high finance, intelligence services, and the mafia.
Yeah.
All kind of intermingling their cash and doing things together in very nefarious ways. Now, okay, I think I got to read Masters of Paradise like cover to cover. Since you didn't have like footnotes down, I think I'm just going to start taking us through this book that tells the story of Castle, but also resorts, and really this hub of criminal activity in the Bahamas. So there's actually a little in his intro. He sort of sets the tone for kind of what he means about these sort of criminal organizations, and like, I guess any good academic, he has some bones to pick with like the, you know, epistemological categories that people sometimes use. So he kind of shoots down like a lot of the theories about like the evolution of La Cosa Nostra and how a lot of that was sort of a fiction that was sort of pasted onto it like later when they tried to sort of destroy it in the 70s and the 80s, but it was much more kind of nuanced, like these sort of networks of criminal gangs were kind of working together. But anyway, so he says, unlike the bogus historical material offered to explain the evolution of La Cosa Nostra, the historical development of organized crime as a social system is fairly well known. In the United States, it was created from the entrepreneurial politics of the 19th century, which through patronage controlled criminal justice institutions, from the actions and activities of industrial robber barons fearful of labor agitators, and from the successful agitations of temperance groups. Professional criminals provided services for politicians, particularly at election time, and for robber barons as, quote, agent provocateurs and strikebreakers. They also manufactured and or distributed commodities outlawed by moral reformers. Naturally, they received protection from criminal justice and often a great deal of money in return. Some criminals tended to specialize, although others were active in many spheres. Over time, some founded large and relatively stable gangs which pursued alliances with other criminals. Other organized criminals preferred the efficiency of small group. Typo. Other organized criminals preferred the efficiency of small groups quickly brought together and speedily scattered. All sorts of events, from successful, ephemeral reform campaigns to murderous competition among criminals for territories and status, worked to diminish the size and stability of criminal organizations. For scores of particular personal reasons, alliances came and went. In sum, professional criminals were those who took it upon themselves to organize crime. Their true work was the process of organizing crime itself. Organizing crime demands ceaseless self-affirming activity, and professional or organized criminals were, and remain, an anxious, worried lot, similar to most Weberian Protestant/capitalists. True. Yes. Forms of clientelism bind the system together, and it surprises no one to find, quote, bent lawyers and gangsters working to satisfy demands for illicit goods and services, or plundering a host of victims. The serious crime community seems an equivalent, but more evocative way to describe the social system of organized crime. It is particularly useful if there are no quibbles about what is serious, which in this context means the illegal concentration of power. So that's his definition of a serious crime community. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. This responds to quite an important suggestion made by the chief of Rackets Bureau not long ago. He proclaimed the necessity for, quote, a reconceptualization of the basis for racketeering work, one which would focus resources upon situations where economic analysis indicated illegal concentrations of power. The crime community, on the other hand, indicates the participants in, quote, private criminal orders, which have some organizational scheme and, most importantly, the power to overcome public order, and who are separated from others by some unquantifiable ratio between wise guy and chump. In searching for a way to describe organized criminal activity in the Brooklyn, New York neighborhood of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Harold Laswell and Jeremiah McKenna of the Policy Sciences Center coined the phrase private criminal order. They judged that organized crime was the most powerful force in the community for many reasons, including the following. It grossed more revenue from its drug operations and gambling activities than the federal government collected in income taxes, was the largest employer of Bedford-Stuyvesant residents, and had effectively nullified every counterattack government mounted against it. Constructing their theoretical position around a policy sciences approach, Laswell and McKenna noted that organized crime, quote, participates in the official decision process of the community. Organized crime, a ruthless private monopoly of power, through its demonstrable ability to overwhelm official decision processes of community, causing the confusion and demoralization of the processes of law and government, is thus responsible for a public order problem of great magnitude. They judged organized crime was therefore, quote, non-ideological, concerted criminality of sufficient weight and scope of power to inhibit public control. It was, in their estimation, a private criminal order. So that's the definition that he's kind of rolling with. And he actually got the expression, the serious crime community, from one of the undercover operatives that was working for the intelligence division of the IRS on a secret case in the 1970s. And this is a big subject of the book. It's called Operation Tradewinds. It's kind of a framing device for the whole thing. This was an undercover operation that the IRS conducted in the Bahamas to try to figure out, that zeroed in ultimately on this institution, Castle Bank, and believed that it was being used by wealthy people in the United States, including the Pritzker family, to basically launder and like move their wealth offshore and completely evade taxation. So this is like, a tax man. This sort of became his white whale for almost a decade, trying to keep this operation going and like catching some people at it. And he recruited kind of a group of, I think most people were like part of the same family, but Sally Woodruff was the fifth undercover agent, TW5, who got a lot of like really spicy information in her investigations. And she's the one that coined the phrase serious crime community. But so they dug up a lot of stuff, but also tons of roadblocks in the government basically threatened to stymie their investigation. And ultimately, nobody really got punished seriously for whatever Castlebank did, though it was forced to close. So anyways, I think we can move on from, actually, because he mentions things in passing like P2 and like the Vatican bank scandal and shit like that, and like Michelle Sindona and Roberto Calvi, and I guess kind of their tangential connections to the Bahamas. He does say here, although the Bahamas was not central to the Sindona and Calvi conspiracies, it was utilized. In fact, the two men and many of their associates routed millions of dollars through Bahamian companies. Using the Bahamas for international criminal activities is a relatively recent development. For American criminals in particular, the Bahamas' prominence was related to Cuban developments. Almost as close as Cuba as it is to Florida, the Bahamas was at most an underdeveloped criminal entrepot until Castro and his revolution succeeded. Castro's triumph in January 1959 marked the end for American organized criminals on the Caribbean's largest island. Havana has been characterized as, quote, the place for the good time, the prostitute, and the cigar, the blue film, the daiquiri at Sloppy Joe's at the Florida bar, the quick win at the roulette table. A fair amount of Havana's organized crime was controlled by American criminals who were as displeased with socialism's conquest as were the American sugar companies. Organized crime boss Meyer Lansky was by far the most important. In partnership with dictator Fulgencio Batista, Lansky has been credited for helping turn Cuba into, quote, the whorehouse of the Western Hemisphere. Lansky and associates turned to the Bahamas when they were driven from Cuba. So their initial move took place in Freeport, Grand Bahama Island. There was a first resort project on Grand Bahama Island by the former swindler and sometimes a CIA asset Wallace Groves. And Lansky, through various proxies, embarked on an effort to legalize casino gambling in the Bahamas. But before we go to that, I think we can move on to the next chapter, just talking about a little bit about the background history of the Bahamas and like how this, how it developed as a haven for criminals and other people. And also, we're going to see some characters that we brought up before. Some very interesting people. The dream town of Freeport is the first chapter. God, there's so many connections. Apologies if we don't get to like all of them today, because there's literally
a sprawling web of interlines.
I know.
Here.
I'm going to try to fly through it like relatively quickly. I mean, it's such a rogues gallery of sus lords. Okay, here we go. All right. So also important to note, this is a British colony, I think, up until... I actually think it might still be technically under like the Commonwealth of Great Britain, but it was like more directly managed by like a governor general.
I've been to the Bahamas, and they have like the Queen on their currency and stuff.
Yes, they do. So that's also an interesting thing, because it's like it creates a kind of weird diplomatic relationship between the U.S. and Bahamas, where like this is a problem the IRS ran into, where they kind of didn't have the authority to like go to the Bahamas and like request bank files and stuff. But Block writes, just to start here, that Grand Bahamas Island future belonged to Wallace Groves, once considered one of Wall Street's bright young men, until he took a fall for various frauds and embezzlement. Later, in attempting to fulfill his plans for the island's development, Groves didn't hesitate in mortgaging a portion of that future to organized crime. So Groves started out as a bond salesman in Baltimore. He went to Georgetown University Law School. He acquired a few small loan companies in and around Washington, D.C., and I guess his method was to buy the companies, puff them up with some capital, merge them with a Chicago firm, and quickly sell out his interest. The method was repeated with the purchase of a fistful of broken-down investment trusts, which he transformed into the Equity Corporation and then sold at a profit of about $750,000. And next, he affiliated with a General Investment Corporation in collaboration with the president of a shaky business called Phoenix Securities. These were the Depression years, and Groves had done exceptionally well. Feeling flush, he sailed to the Bahamas and bought an island, Little Whale Cay, located approximately 35 miles from Nassau. He also started 2 Bahamian companies and became friendly with one of the local power brokers, especially attorney Stafford Sands. But in the late fall of 1938, Groves' modest financial empire crashed, and he was charged with defrauding the General Investment Corporation. So he had to kind of sell his stock in the company. Let's see, he was indicted. Actually, in 1941, he was convicted and sent to prison and released in 1944. When he got out of prison, he returned to Little Whale Cay and tried to resume business. By this time, he and his first wife, the former actress Monet Lindley, had divorced. He subsequently married Canadian-born Georgette Cusson, who had been his first wife's hairdresser. She would become his business partner in Freeport's development and later in further development of Nassau's Paradise Island. They made an interesting pair. Wallace was heavy and tall, resembling Sidney Greenstreet with a mustache, and Georgette was a lovely, elegant woman of striking taste. This is interesting, actually. Just before the visionary Groves arrived on the scene, Grand Bahama Island barely supported 5,000 people and some fishing and farming. It was little more than a very large pine barren. But there was no denying Grand Bahama Island had potentially important features, which caught the eye of resort developers. Its proximity to Florida, fabulous weather, and shimmering beaches were obvious advantages, which attracted Englishman Billy Butlin in the latter 40s. He was fast becoming the travel and vacation czar for the British working and lower middle classes. But apparently his vacation village that he built failed because British people didn't want to travel that far and couldn't afford it. Then Groves bought the unsuccessful Abaco Lumber Company, which got to work on Grand Bahama, heavily foresting and logging the island. He turned the failing enterprise around and, made a bunch of money off of it. Unfortunately, as a consequence of the heavy logging, the island was transformed to mostly scrub and brush. The most fertile soil leached out to sea during summer rains without the pines to serve as its anchor. It was clear why old-timers called it the Rock. So they just, destroyed the natural ecosystem of the island to, log it all. Very cool. Mm-hmm. Then here's the thing. He wanted to build a free port and industrial complex in the vicinity of Hawksbill Creek, located on the southern shore of Grand Bahama. But the harbor was too shallow, so they would need to dredge it, which of course was expensive. Block says without government backing, nobody would have risked this Freeport venture. Government support was crucial, and by the time the plan took shape, it was evident that Groves and Stafford Sands, his political friend from the 30s, had an intriguing deal. In the intervening years, Sands had become chairman of the Bahamas Development Board, roughly equivalent to the Ministry of Tourism. For his part, Groves had organized the Grand Bahamas Port Authority Limited to do the dredging and construction work, while Sands would persuade the Bahamian government to provide over 50,000 acres of crown land at $2.80 an acre. They also were granted certain rights and privileges to the Port Authority, including the prerogative to license others wishing to conduct business within the port area. This was an extraordinary grant of power, putting what is often labeled the new property by political scientists, licenses which create semi-monopolies and affected occupations, into the hands of private entrepreneurs. So the government relinquished all custom duties, emergency taxes, and all other duties and taxes upon everything needed to construct the ports. They just got amazing tax-free opportunities. Then I think he got a kind of sus shipping billionaire, Ludwig, to come in on the project and actually put up the money to build the port. He was interesting. He was a highly reclusive billionaire, and the vast majority of his fleet was registered in Liberia under the Liberia Maritime Registry, which we talked about, which was managed by George Olmsted and the International Bank of Washington, D.C. We mentioned in our BCCI episode. Right. So anyways, they get this sweetheart deal. And then Block says this initial transfer of public authority to private power set the process in motion by which organized criminals would inevitably increase their sway over Bahamian affairs. For as long as it lasted, this grant made the company a government and soon gave Meyer Lansky, his associates and affiliates, an open door. It was reminiscent, although on a vastly smaller scale, of China's territorial concessions to British opium merchants in the 19th century. So Stafford Sands had come a long way since his 1930s meeting with Groves. Then he was just another member of the local elite, composed of wealthy merchants and attorneys. By the standards of the Bahamas, these men were wealthy and influential. They were called the Bay Street Boys because they regularly met at a club on Bay and Charlotte Streets in downtown Nassau to discuss politics and business over pints of dark beer. The Bay Street Boys controlled the Bahamas until the rise of local black power in the mid-60s. Their rule was so complete, they never bothered to form a political party until the challenge of the black-led Progressive Liberal Party moved them to organize. They then formed the United Bahamian Party, but its rule lasted just a few years. So Stafford Sands was always interested in Bahamian development, which meant for him resorts and casinos. Starting in the early 30s, he was busy attempting to work out a way to legalize casinos. There were a few small ones, I guess, and they were technically illegal, but not allowed to operate by authorities, including the Bahamian Club, which is owned by an American named Mackenzie from Rhode Island. Also collaborating with Mackenzie from Rhode Island in the casino was Bahamian barrister Kenneth Solomon, a prominent Bay Street boy whose son, Norman Solomon, would become the leader of the political opposition of the Bahamas, especially concerned with drug corruption in the 80s. A member of the Bahamian House of Assembly and a merchant, Solomon protected the former owner's interests, which included entertaining Gloria Vanderbilt, the Duke of Kent, the Governor General of Canada, and Al Capone. So there we go. Anderson Cooper's mom is like hanging out down here like in the 30s. But anyways, so then basically Sands was able to get the assembly to pass a bill at the end of the 30s to operate casinos under certain circumstances. And that's how the Bahamian Club got kind of legalized. But before the benefit of a government gambling license would bolster Freeport's allegedly lagging development, Groves was busy with ideas for his port. His first and most basic move was to get the harbor constructed by dredging a 200-foot wide, 30-foot deep channel and a turning basin with at least a 600-foot radius. For this, he turned to the mysterious Daniel Keith Ludwig, who was on his way to owning the largest private shipping fleet in the world. A quiet and self-effacing man, Ludwig hardly ever granted interviews, and during the 1960s employed a small and extremely loyal staff marked by its efficiency and silence on company matters. He had around 55 huge tankers and bulk carriers, a few sailing under the American flag, and operated by a Ludwig firm called National Bulk Carriers, Inc. The majority of his fleet was registered in Liberia, West Africa, and was managed through a complex chain of holding companies located in Liberia and Panama, and probably several other offshore havens as well. From his modest headquarters in New York, Ludwig ran a diversified worldwide industrial and financial empire. His project with Groves metamorphosed into other major concerns in the Bahamas and elsewhere. Within just a few years, Ludwig's known holdings included coal mines, oil wells, shipyards, a harbor construction and dredging company that cleared the mire from Hawksbill Creek, and was soon working on an $80 million project to dredge the Hooghly River in India to permit iron ore exports. He had real estate interests embracing an estimated $40 million in common market countries and some of the largest private holdings in the world, including an immense section of Amazonian Brazil. In addition, Ludwig owned over $100 million of Union Oil stock, 2 hotels in Bermuda, and plans for others in Freeport, Nassau, and Paradise Island in the Bahamas, and still others in Mexico and San Francisco, which became part of Ludwig's Princess Hotel chain. He also had a deep water cargo transfer complex on an island near Japan, and about 33% of the Marazen Oil Company, and a myriad of other enterprises involving almost everything under the sun.
Yeah, wow.
Eventually, everything under the sun. Yeah, and you ever hear about this guy? So eventually he constructed a couple hotels in Freeport and leased them to Morris Landsberg, a Lansky Confederate and Miami Beach hotel owner. Interesting, right? So Lansky's getting up in this really. So Ludwig built the port facility because he needed an offshore oil bunkering fuel depot operation close to the East Coast. This was necessary for his own fleet of oil tankers as well as others, which are already too large for most ports to handle. So he, I guess, charged $5.6 million for constructing the harbor. But Groves, while this went on, sought additional financing. But most investors were repelled by the barren white limestone land and clouds of sandflies and mosquitoes. They lacked the vision to match Groves, and the particular need for an oil bunkering facility, which prompted Ludwig. It wasn't too long, however, before Groves found people with imperial ambitions and lots of capital. Now, this is an interesting name check. He secured funding from the exceptionally wealthy Charles Allen, the leader of a family-centered investment banking house, Allen & Company, with major interests in Hollywood, and from Charles W. Hayward, an English entrepreneur who also commanded a substantial fortune. Now, I just looked up Charles Allen. They are a very private, successful investment banking house in New York that is still run by like descendants of the 2 brothers that founded it. One interesting thing to note about them is they were huge early investors in kind of a lot of big tech companies in like the 2000s. And they hosted the Allen & Company Sun Valley Conference, which is an annual media finance conference hosted and funded by Allen & Company in Sun Valley, Idaho. And that has become like, it's almost like a kind of American Davos for like tech people kind of summit. Former conference guests have included Bill and Melinda Gates, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Tony Blair, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, former Philippine senator and Allen alumnus Mar Rojas, Eric Schmidt, like Mark Zuckerberg, Meg Whitman, LeBron James, Chris Christie, Bob Iger, Oprah Winfrey, Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the idea. Very big, ritzy, fancy conference, but it's like nobody, it's kind of a meme of like nobody knows who like the secret of Allen and Company is, but they host this big like kind of bullshit TED Talky conference in Idaho. So they were getting involved in the Bahamas very early. So they invested some money along with this Charles W. Hayward character. So they didn't really have a lot of business and didn't make a lot of money for the first few years. And that's when they started to create a lot of shell companies kind of around this. I think what happened is like the whole industrial port thing like didn't exactly pan out as profitably as maybe people thought. So they pivoted to, okay, now we're going to build resorts. So Sands got an order passed in 1960 to allow the Port Authority to build a first-class deluxe resort hotel. To accomplish this, they formed the Grand Bahama Development Company, DevCo, in 1961, which was the creation of Groves and Louis Arthur Chesler of Toronto, Canada. It would prove to be a consequential company in the life of Freeport in particular, and the Bahamas in general. So this new partner, Chesler, was Lou Chesler, who actually, funny enough, is a big boy, a 300-pound man called Uncle Lou, Big Lou, and the Moose. He was a Canadian guy who became very active in various Canadian mining ventures. He made his first million in 1946 trading in mining stocks and subsequently in land development in Florida. In 1959, his Florida real estate firm, the General Development Company, was reportedly worth $50 million. Big Lou had an intriguing range of associates, including several of the financiers backing the Port Authority and most of the Lansky Syndicate. He was very closely aligned with the Allen family, thereby bringing them into the orbit of organized crime. Additionally, the vulgar Chesler, he once urinated in public at a posh New Year's Eve party in Freeport, served as Lansky's Bahamian point man. Indeed, in the genesis of Chesler's relationships with the Allens lies one of the paths used by organized criminals into the Bahamas. The Chesler and Allen Association was actually formed in Hollywood and prospered when, guess which sus fucking movie studio, when Warner Brothers Pictures was coming apart at its financial seams. And I think if anybody remembers our Eagles episode, I think we might answer today, like, what the fuck was going on with Warner Communications in this period. So listen to this. Warner Brothers Pictures, I guess, was actually failing financially. It happened in the following way. Charles Allen decided to get involved in the risky business of motion picture production. His interest in show business had been sparked by his first wife, who was a Broadway producer. In time, he became friends with several studio heads, including Jack Warner of Warner Brothers. Allen also got to know and like Ray Stark, a legendary literary and film agent who represented Marilyn Monroe, Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, Kirk Douglas, and William Holden. Lastly, Allen formed an association with the banker Serge Semenenko from the First National Bank of Boston, who was an active and innovative film financier. This guy, I'd never heard of this guy before. Semenenko was characterized as the mystery man of banking by reporters when he finally granted them a long-sought interview in the spring of 1964. At the time, he was riding the crest of a wave highlighted by his managing to arrange loans in excess of $5 billion without a loss. Among his clients were Warner Brothers, the International Paper Company, Conrad Hilton, and the Statler Hotel chain, and the Hearst Publishing conglomerate. Semenenko was born in Odessa, Ukraine. It says Odessa, Russia, but I won't trigger anybody.
No.
Well, maybe soon. Maybe by the time this episode comes out. He was born in Odessa, the Russian Empire, in 1903, and to a very well-to-do family before the Russian Revolution in 1917, which forced his family to flee to Constantinople, now Istanbul, Turkey. His father had been a wealthy banker and philanthropist. Serge started his education in Odessa, continued it at Roberts College in Constantinople, receiving a BS degree, and finished it at the Harvard Graduate School of Business. From Harvard, he went to the First National Bank of Boston as a credit clerk and stayed there for 5 decades, eventually becoming vice chairman with unique authority. He was something of a, quote, bank within a bank, making his own deals, collecting million-dollar fees that, contrary to bank policy, may not have been turned over to the bank. Semenenko was gently forced out of First National when it became known he bought shares in the same companies he financed as a banker. He retired on July 17, 1967, the day the Wall Street Journal carried a one-page story headlined Unorthodox Banker and subtitled Swinging with the Jet Set. While billionaire D.K. Ludwig was dredging Freeport's harbor, Allen and Semenenko were restructuring the dismal finances of Warner Brothers. The film company was in desperate condition with little cash on hand in 1956. Because of an antitrust action 3 years earlier, Warner Brothers had been split, with part of it becoming the Stanley Warner Corporation. Stanley and Jack Warner were, of course, the Warner Brothers, a movie theater operating company. Unlike his brother's company, which did very well, Warner Brothers, run by Jack, was a failure. Allen and Semenenko were called in to help out. Their first move to raise some working capital for the business was to sell all of Warner Brothers' pre-1948 films to a new company called Associated Artists. The board chairman of Associated Artists was Lou Chesler. 1 year later, Ray Stark joined Chesler. Shortly after, Stark and another Associated Artist officer, Elliot Hyman, left to form a production company called Seven Arts, which also bought and sold films for television. Chesler was close on their heels, and before much time had passed, he was the head of Seven Arts. Now, when Devco was formed in the Bahamas, among the investors were Allen, Stark, and Hyman. In addition, the Seven Arts Corporation purchased 21% of Devco for $5 million. Chesler was made Devco's president, while he was chairman of Seven Arts, not to be left out with Semenenko, who was installed as Devco's own banker. So by the time Lou Chesler was chairman at Associated Artists, he was known as a stock promoter who worked from time to time with organized crime boss Meyer Lansky and various other mob gamblers and racketeers. Among Chesler's criminal specialties was the handling of stolen securities, which he moved through both Switzerland and the Bahamas. The rotund Chesler, the big boy Chesler, had a coterie of crooked friends and questionable associates, some of whom merely invested in his enterprises, although others enjoyed company positions that covered either part-time criminal activities or masked full-time criminal careers. An example of the second category was New York attorney Morris Mack Schwabel, an officer and director of Chesler's Florida firm, General Development, and a vice president at Associated Artists. While at the latter firm, he was busy working a securities fraud for which he was later convicted. That's a lot right there. But basically you can see that like Meyer Lansky was both like deeply in like the interlocks between like Hollywood financing and Meyer Lansky and like the Allen and Company and like big Lou Chesler from Toronto. They're all swirling around together. They're all serving on the boards of like, they have interlocking board of directors basically going off like crazy. And
yes.
I guess
here nor there.
Yeah.
But did you find it weird when they said that it's called Istanbul, Constantinople? Like in
I did find that weird. Yeah, I don't know. Like in
it's
the
like
1400s.
definitely not
I know, like
Constantinople at that time. But anyway, whatever.
Maybe he thought like, right? Like it changed after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. I'm not sure. Yeah, weird
no,
typo.
it did not go back to being Constantinople. It's never going back. Sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, continuing with the gangster connections here. Lou Chesler's involvement with gangsters stretched back to at least 1942 when he was a partner in various ventures with racketeer John Pullman and his brother-in-law Alfred C. Cohen. Pullman had been a bootlegger who served time in 1931 for prohibition violations. In prison, Pullman became friendly with Yiddy Bloom, a notorious bootlegger from Minneapolis. Bloom's real name was Isidore Blumenfeld, and he and his two brothers, known as Kid Can and Harry Bloom, led an exceptionally violent band of Midwestern mobsters. Yiddy was a longtime Confederate of Lansky's. The bootlegging and gambling underworlds of New York and various Midwestern cities, such as Minneapolis and St. Paul, were bridged by Lansky and many of his racketeer friends. These included Charles Ward from New York, also involved in Reno gambling establishments in the 30s, Dave Berman, a leader of Detroit's infamous Purple Gang, and Michael Trigger Mike Coppola, who frequently booked Chesler's high-rolling sports bets. Pullman's introduction to Lansky came by way of Bloom, whereas Chesler's was likely arranged by Pullman. To make sure Pullman and Lansky were ably represented in Freeport, Chesler appointed Al Cohen, a Devco executive, vice president, and paid him $60,000 a year. In the mid-50s, Pullman became a Canadian and moved to Toronto. At the same time, Chesler teamed up with Schwabel and others in California and Florida. In addition to his Hollywood partners, others toiling with him were Max Orovitz, later indicted for stock fraud and a member of Lansky's Miami Beach crowd, John Reagan Tex McCrary, a well-known radio personality and public relations officer for Seven Arts, who was characterized by a British commission as, quote, an irresponsible and meddlesome person, and the politically important Maxwell M. Rabb. Under Eisenhower, Rabb was both the cabinet secretary and a special assistant to Sherman Adams, Ike's White House chief of staff. Most recently, Rabb was appointed ambassador to Italy by President Reagan. Okay, stick a note on that for later. Chesler and Lansky and their associates were intertwined in many endeavors. For example, Lansky men provided much of the investment capital for Miami's International Airport Hotel, started in 1958. Now that's interesting. We'll come back to airport hotels a little later, because you know what the first Hyatt hotel was ever? It was an airport hotel LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, in the late 50s that they bought. They actually didn't build it. They're not Hyatt. Like, some family company named Hyatt built it. But interesting that I wonder, just a synchronicity. Yeah. You know, there's always been whispers about how the Pritzkers gone into it, which he'll get into. So Rabb was chairman of the board of the Miami International Airport Hotel and member of the stock option committee like 2 years after it was built. Other project investors included Bryant R. Burton, an L.A. attorney connected to the mobster-dominated Sands and Fremont hotels in Las Vegas, who served as vice president and director for the airport hotel, and Jack Cooper, who owned a substantial interest in the West Flagler dog track in Miami. Cooper was more than he appeared in the airport hotel prospectus filed with the SEC. A major shareholder in the West Flagler Kennel Club and of the minor league baseball team, the Miami Marlins, he also sold munitions. One deal involved a squadron of supposedly inoperative P-51 fighters sold to Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic. This 1953 transaction led 9 years later to Cooper's conviction for tax evasion. Cooper was also close to Lyndon Johnson's notorious aide Bobby Baker. They often traveled together, for example, to the Dominican Republic working various deals. They were joined in these ventures by gambler Ed Levinson, born in Chicago and weaned in gambling clubs in Detroit, Newport, Kentucky, Miami Beach, and Las Vegas. In Vegas, Levinson was associated with the Sands Casino, then the Flamingo, and finally the Fremont, which he refurbished with the help of a friendly loan from the racketeer-controlled Teamsters Union. These relationships between Lyndon Johnson's intimate associate and organized criminals from Miami Beach and Las Vegas confirmed the mob's continuing influence in the White House after the assassination of President John Kennedy. Chesler's connections to Meyer Lansky became more explicit in the 50s. He hired Michael McClaney, one of Lansky's Cuban casino directors, to manage a Miami Beach dinner club Chesler owned. This was an important period for the mob bosses of Las Vegas and Cuba, too, as they sought legitimate businesses in which they could safely invest, quote, skim money coming out of their casinos, as well as profits from other illicit activities. They needed new capital investments for obvious reasons, and because they were always in a fever of speculation, spending their days and nights talking deals, making deals, and dreaming deals that crisscrossed the boundaries between legal and illegal. To deal was to live. Interesting. We know who else likes talking about making deals, right? Yeah. Interesting. So individuals like Chesler and some of his partners played a middle role in this financial whirl, founding and directing companies, then folding them into other companies and so on, with illicit capital the fixed point around which dozens, perhaps hundreds of interwoven firms pivoted. They created ventures, some chancy, others blue chip, for themselves and their underworld colleagues. Although deeply involved in organized crime, Chesler was not a gunman associated with violence. He was a thief, swindler, moneymaker, and mover with enough respectability to provide a cover for the myriad deals linking racketeers and upperworld notables. In 1960, the two peripatetic Canadians, Chesler and Pullman, left continental North America for new pastures. Chesler moved to Freeport, while Pullman went to Switzerland. The result of Pullman's relocation was the founding of a Swiss bank in Geneva called the International Credit Bank, another step in safeguarding mob money. The consequence of Chesler's migration was DevCo. So going on, it kind of talks about the different scams that they kind of ran, like kind of in a back and forth with the Bahamian government to like get more privileges and more exemptions and tax breaks and shit. And they cooked their books and all that stuff. And eventually they finally got a resort approved in 1964. Okay, so here we go. So plans for a Freeport casino had been in the wings before DevCo was itself formed. Discussions about setting up a casino in Freeport were held in Miami in 1960 among Meyer Lansky, Chesler, Max Orovitz, and Dino Cellini, one of Lansky's most important Confederates. The formation of Bahamas Amusements occurred about midpoint in the building of the Lacayan Beach, thus making the construction integration of a casino quite easy. And I guess they tricked the Bahamian government because the original hotel design they submitted included room for indoor squash courts. There was never any intention of constructing the courts, which were instead an architectural cover for the casino floor. It was planned long before the creation of the amusements company and the granting of the certificate of exemption. So the Monte Carlo Casino and Hotel opened in January 1964 in Freeport. So this is like the Meyer-Lansky kind of connected one. Let's see, they were built by another Lou Chesler connected company, and most of the 4 million shares of the Lacayan Beach Hotel and Development Corp were held by Canadian firms such as the Montreal Trust Company, and also a minority of shares were sold to the family of Frank Nitti, Chicago's former crime boss, and construction funds totaling $11 million were borrowed from the Atlantic Acceptance Corporation, a finance company based in Toronto and Hamilton, Canada. So I also sus Toronto. Like there's going to be some weird, like Canada never gets enough credit for being sus, but there's definitely like a weird Canadian connection going on with all this shit as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there. Like I guess the United States is incredibly sus, so it's not like there's a magical sus dissipating field at the Canadian border.
No, definitely not. And the capital flow. We'll have to get into Gustavus Meyer's history of the Canadian fortunes one day. But the capital connections, and I think we'll see like the Bronfman family actually get involved later. Very interlocked with a lot of these other characters. So, okay, in the second week of January 1964, this hotel and casino opened. The grand opening came on January 22nd and was reportedly attended by, quote, high society freeloaders, faded debutantes, and jaded gigolos from the Florida Gold Coast. The seaminess of the affair was caught by a Miami Herald reporter in attendance who noted the casino was in, quote, the hands of a dozen or more men long associated with gambling in Las Vegas, Havana, New York, Washington, and Miami. He identified the professional gamblers and racketeers staffing the Monte Carlo, beginning with Frank Ritter, better known as Reed, who had been banned from many racetracks and was like a bookmaker. Then there was Max Courtney. The cashier was Max Brudner, a bookmaker from Miami Beach, a bunch of gambling arrests. And Dino Cellini, a Confederate of Meyer-Lansky, was the supervisor of the casino. So obviously, and you know, Chesler said he hired all these American bookmakers because they're, quote, experience. So that would end up being like a little bit of a controversy with like the local Bahaman government, like later, like because these guys were so obviously organized crime associates, but they were able to kind of skirt it and not get in trouble. So yeah, he goes through the bios. We don't really need to zoom in on like Cellini and all these other people, but they had a bunch of bizarre connections, even going over to like Europe. But he says, and on it went, a seemingly unending series of criminal enterprises and activities staffed, however, by aging mobsters. Indeed, many members of the Lansky syndicate by the 1960s could have qualified as senior citizens. It is only natural that a new generation of, quote, wise guys was being groomed. Now, this is a name I'm just going to briefly have to stop and go on like a schizo
right,
for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were going to have to do this, I think.
I'm going to have to do this. So for this syndicate, the most important youngster, born in 1933, was Alvin Ira Malnick. He was educated, earning a BA from Washington University in St. Louis and a law degree from the University of Miami in 1959, and sophisticated. While in law school, Malnick worked in a fraudulent second mortgage business. Just out of school, he was employed by Albert Moniz, a major layoff bookmaker on Miami Beach who had investments in the Casino de Capri in Havana and several Las Vegas casinos. Moniz was also a loan shark's loan shark, lending money at reduced rates to retail-level sharks. In 1964, Malnick lived in the same lavish Miami Beach apartment as did Tureen and Neslin, who were two of the mobbed-up guys that worked down in the Bahamas. His previous residence was transferred to the mistress of another older organized crime associate, gangster Fat Tony Salerno, another big boy. Malnick conducted a fair amount of business.
Sopranos characters here. All right.
We really are. Malnick conducted a fair amount of business in Southern California and had a second home in West LA. In California, he was general counsel to the Allied Empire Corporation, a major stockholder in a secret Bahamian bank of prime importance for the syndicate's gambling operations. This was the Bank of World Commerce, whose discovery led to the IRS's Operation Tradewinds. Barely 4 years out of law school, Malnick was recognized by the FBI as a major organized criminal. The Bureau bugged his office in the summer of 1963 and discovered his close relationship with Richard Gerstein, a Florida state attorney, overheard conversations with a local judge about buying some of Lou Chesler's Freeport land, noted that Fat Tony Salerno's mortgage was secured through a loan from John Pullman, listened to discussions about a deal on a jukebox video machine manufactured in Paris, in which many racketeers and state attorney Gerstein eventually invested, and finally recorded several conversations between Malnick and Jake Kossman, another mob attorney. The FBI was very interested in Kossman because he was Jimmy Hoffa's attorney, and those were the days when Attorney General Robert Kennedy was determined to send the Teamsters union boss to prison. Malnick and Kossman talked about Hoffa, fixing juries, and general mob business. Later, the FBI recorded Malnick talking with another Lansky associate who had obtained a top-secret intelligence report from the Department of Justice concerning the mob's Bahamian operations. So, stop right there. Al Malnick. I had looked into him years ago. I forget what vector led me to it, but this is a fascinating case because this guy I think is still alive. He's very old now, but as you could read right there, it's not exactly hidden that he is alleged to be involved with organized crime. Some people even called him back in the 80s the actual designated successor of Meyer Lansky. He inherited Meyer Lansky's syndicate operations and is basically the guy leading them. But it's funny because if you Google Alvin Malnick, and I remember doing this years ago and trying to find out about him, what you'll see is he's just a successful businessman who gives a lot to charity, including, I don't know if he runs it, but one of the biggest things that he's associated with is the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a little bit yikes, but also really interesting thing about him. He was based in Miami Beach mostly, but I remember, I brought up before sus Hollywood filmmaker / producer Brett Ratner, and actually I forget what episode I brought it up on, but I remember I discovered an old archive article talking about how somehow Brett Ratner, as a little boy growing up on Miami Beach, happened to befriend this kindly old man that used to sit on the park bench by the beach every day. And then this old man kind of took Brett Ratner under his wing and brought him places and introduced him to people. And then eventually he died, and he noticed, after he started hanging out with this old man, that everyone started, treating him with, respect. Oh, wow, it's a kid. And it's I don't know, at some point he realized that this old man was Meyer Lansky. And, that's fucking weird enough that your, kindly kind of surrogate grandfather figure that you just happened to meet is fucking Meyer Lansky, dude. And then on top of that, I think we had talked about how, he eventually, after making these kind of tacky big budget movies in the 90s, and also getting into NYU Film School at age 16, despite being a C student and getting a letter of recommendation from Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I feel it's not the type of thing where you are so advanced at film that you are gonna, I don't know. It's
if
weird.
He is, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, exactly.
And
what did he do?
So, and I always wondered, how the fuck did it come into being that Steven Spielberg wrote this teenager a fucking letter of recommendation in the 80s, at the height of his E.T. success? That's so fucking bizarre. And I remember looking up his family. Brett Ratner's family history is a little bit murky because he had no relationship with his father growing up, and I it's really funny, actually. I think he describes growing up in just a middle-class Jewish household in Miami. And I guess his mother was a Jewish Cuban girl who had moved as a teenager to Miami. And I think she had Brett Ratner when she was 16 or 17. And then the father was actually the son of a very powerful mail order rat poison tycoon. I actually didn't know this till yesterday. But Ronald Ratner was his father, but his grandfather was Rat Poison Company founder and real estate developer Lee Ratner. And Lee Ratner was good friends with Al Malnick. So they were friends.
It's one of those Anthony Weiner type things that not quite as on the nose, but that they were rat poison entrepreneurs named Ratner.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that is a little weird. Yeah, it was D-Con, like D-Con.
Yeah, I've used D-Con
was
before.
Like,
all right, yeah.
That's Ratner family. So, he had moved down. He was actually, I think, from Chicago, actually, another Chicago connection. But Lee Ratner eventually moved down to Miami and became like a big real estate developer, where he eventually became very good friends with Al Malnick. And then allegedly his son knocked up a teenager. And then I guess Ronald Ratner ended up being like homeless, and I think he got involved with drugs or something, and he kind of disappeared out of his life for like 15 years. But actually, Brett Ratner himself says that the person who basically raised him and was like a father to him was Al Malnick. Al Malnick was like kind of like how Gavin Newsom was like kind of almost like half raised by the Getty family, and he was like an honorary Getty. Brett Ratner was effectively kind of raised by Al Malnick, the alleged successor of like the Meyer Lansky empire, which then throws into doubt that whole story about how he just ran into Meyer Lansky one day. Like, dude, bullshit.
And Meyer Lansky was like, "You're gonna be my like Fagin child.
You're a special kid."
Like,
this is the ultimate gifted child story, but like in a sleazy mafia way. And so, also we mentioned that Brett Ratner has gotten Me Too'd about probably like 40 fucking times, but you just can't get rid of him. Like, he's uncancelable. And right now, he has his own film financing company on the lot of where else? Warner Brothers, that he set up, I think, in like 2013. Now, that was set up, it was called Rat Pack, and the Pack part was James Packer, who's like kind of a sus Australian billionaire. So he's uncancelable. He sets up a film production company in relationship with Warner Brothers, which, as we've gone over, like as we're going over right now, had like weird mafia funding connections going back to like the 30s, and also was like literally bought out by like the National Kinney Parking Company in the early 70s. Warner Communications was, at least. And that basically is widely alleged to be a mafia front. And then like that went on to merge with a bunch of other shit, but like that the DNA of it is basically still there. So it's curious then that somebody that has so many like literal personal connections to Meyer Lansky gets a job on the lot as this producer, and also like can't get canceled for being like a huge fucking scumbag. I mean, like there's so many stories about him. I won't even waste time on it. He used to like skulk around, I think, at NYU where he went, hitting on like freshman girls when he was like in his 40s. I've heard stories for years that this guy is like the biggest scum. And people said he raped them. Like this guy is like bad news. Yeah, real like Weinstein level, honestly. But then it's interesting. I think in maybe 2014,
wasn't it like an Elliot Page thing where there was some kind of like harassment by Brett Ratner? Where
I think so. I think he might have sexually harassed her.
Yeah,
or him. Sorry.
At the time.
At the time, her yes.
He was. Well, I guess depending on your how you view it, but the issue was kind of like gender related actually, because it was like he would like say to people, "You need to like make out with her so like she understands that she's gay," before he was out as a lesbian at the time. Like before that happened. So yeah, I remember that being like a weird story. Like,
he's done a lot of crazy shit.
Yeah.
But so it's always struck me that I think Brett Ratner serves like an important purpose for a lot of people, and that's why you can't get rid of him in Hollywood. I mean, I guess, he's not talented enough to like be an A-list director anyways, so he's just like the money guy. And that's just like, I guess apparently like Warner Brothers is gonna, keep him in that role indefinitely. But I did actually find just last night, very interesting connection, because actually somebody else bought out the James Packer half of Rat Pack in like 2014, and I think they still own it. And that would be Sir Len Blavatnik, who is a like Jewish, Ukrainian, British naturalized citizen, aluminum oligarch who like made all his money in the early 90s in post-Soviet Ukraine. Does that sound familiar? And this gentleman also happens to own the majority shares in Warner Music Group. That's not all, though. That's not all. I discovered that in 2014, Blavatnik's holding company, Access Holdings, bought a place called Ocean Club, a Four Seasons resort on where else? Paradise Island, the Bahamas, from Kerzner International and Brookfield Asset Management. Now, Kerzner International is Saul Kerzner's company. Saul Kerzner is a South African real estate mogul who actually, if you ever heard like the Steve Van Zandt protest song, I forget what it's called, like No to Sun City or something.
No,
or we won't play at Sun City. It was a very kind of like Live Aid, but a little more woke than Live Aid, of basically like, let's tell this like tycoon who built Saul Kerzner, who built Sun City, to fuck off because he wants us to play his venue, but like he supports like apartheid laws like on his resort. So like white people and black people can't like go to the concert together and shit. So they were like protesting against, you know, not bad, I guess, thing to do. But Saul Kerzner's also like has a lot of alleged like international mafia ties. And I guess he was one of the people like post-Trump at Paradise Island that bought the resort that was the Resorts International place. But then he sold part of a stake of it to Brookfield Capital Management in the, I think, late 2000s or early 2010s. And I had to go look up, what's this Brookfield Asset Management company? Well, it turns out it's a Canadian company. It was originally like a Brazil like utilities company that was bought by the Bronfman brothers in 1959.
Damn.
Now, allegedly, they sold like most of they stopped running it in like the 2000s, but that almost goes like full fucking circle, because we could do a whole other thing on the Bronfman connections, like the CIA, Meyer Lansky. You know, they were the Seagram's fortune, so they were involved in bootlegging kind of mafia shit. Then, I mean, it spins off the Bronfmans into like the Nexium sex cult. I think even one of the Bronfman descendants also ran Warner Music Group, the one who's MIA's baby daddy, and went to the Met Gala with AOC last year.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying?
I
Like these fucking interlocks, man. These interlocks. Also, last thing I'll throw on there that's hilarious about Brookfield, this Bronfman company, or, you know, formerly Bronfman company. In August 2018, Brookfield signed a 99-year lease on, remember this, the financially troubled 666 Fifth Avenue skyscraper owned by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The deal raised suspicions that the Qatar Investment Authority, a major investor in Brookfield, was attempting to influence the Trump administration. So, like, even the satanic skyscraper that Jared Kushner owns, like, the Bronfman family is like, oh yeah, we want. Like, I remember nobody wanted to buy that shit for like years, and then suddenly like these like Qataris like mixed with like the weird like Bronfman Canadian company come about, and they're like, we'll buy it for 99 years. You know, we'll lease it for 99 years. So it just goes to show you, like, ain't nothing new. Like this, whatever this fucking network is, it seems like they're putting people up to this day in important positions in these companies that allow for, like, you know, the investment, like avenues for investment, maybe money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so that's my rant about Brett Ratner and fucking Ira Malnick, who, like, if you just look at, there's a whole like Make-A-Wish Foundation. Also, I found on his website, like iramalnick.com or almalnick.com, he literally has like a page like /BrettRatner.html that's just like a full page like praising Brett Ratner and being like, he's like my son, and like just like pictures of them together. Like, they're very, very close. So you really do gotta wonder with, you know, especially media figures that get very prominent pushes. Sometimes do they have a surrogate father, maybe an uncle or a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather that matters to these networks? And I don't know. It could get speculative.
Like it's one of the weird things in the Masters of Paradise book is like the very end, like after. Actually, like some of the Pritzker stuff, there's that weird section about Russia. I was wondering, like, what you thought about that section. There's some weird, like, stuff.
Well, I think maybe
like the Vorovsky Mir type stuff. Like,
I think maybe we'll hold off on discussion of Russia until the latter part of the episode in the second book, because he gets
small note, because there's like a weird thing where he goes off on about the like thieves' world, you know.
Oh I have slight bones to pick with that.
The early Bolsheviks copied everything that they knew from the like sinister Vorovsky Mir society to create a
I think some of that stuff was a reach a little bit.
I guess he was kind of quoting like somebody else, or sort of paraphrasing Stephen Handelman, I guess.
I don't have very many
Criminal,
things.
Rush's name.
Yeah, Comrade Criminal was the book he was citing. Yeah, I feel like this guy's not like a Marxist, but I feel like he has kind of in a Mae Russell kind of way, or like a Gary Webb kind of way. He's aiming at the right target. Maybe sometimes when he gets to talking about the Soviet Union, he still has a little bit of like ingrained bias that maybe, he hadn't fully, it's not like he takes like the most like based stand on whatever.
No,
but I feel like if you
like
read
a very tiny part of the book, but it's still like kind of
yeah. But you can still take his information, particularly about like stuff that was happening in Russia, kind of to the bank and like draw your own conclusions from it. So it's still good in that sense. Do you want to take a break right now, and then we'll do resorts? Okay.
Sun City is the showplace of Bophuthatswana, one of the so-called independent homelands where South African blacks have been relocated. It's a lavish resort where you can relax and enjoy some of the world's headline entertainers. It's part of the reality of apartheid.